at some point in their career. So without any further ado, let me introduce you to some of the people that will be joining us today. First, you know him, you may know him from movies like Apollo 13, he was in Quantum Leap, Fall Guy, The Bionic Woman, Airwolf. I remember like it was yesterday, this 80s miniseries, World War III. He also was in T.J. Hooker, but Night Gallery. But as important as his work has been in television and film, I think he's probably, and we should all thank him for his incredible work with Toys for Tots, as well as with the Wounded Warrior Project. He's a great guy. He's been coming to these conventions and supporting them for many years. A tremendous talent, and of course you know him originally as Lieutenant Boomer, but he was promoted to Captain Boomer for Galactica 1980, if you consider that canon, the great Herb Jefferson Jr. I'm surprised this next man is actually doing this panel because I talked his ear off for hours at his house. I think he couldn't wait to get rid of me. But he just is a wealth of amazing stories. Now, I told him I don't think I'd ever met a director who worked on The Invisible Man and Gemini Man. I had to hold myself back not to ask him about directing all those great up-close and personals for Wide World of Sports because that was totally off topic. But he worked on such shows as well, $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, Lois and Clark, Quantum Leap. He did the Bionic Showdown MOW, Tales of the Gold Monkey. I mean, this is, for some of us, this is our entire childhood in one person. But then, you know, he's also worked on things like Buffy and Jag and NCIS. Just an incredible guy. If you're lucky, he might tell you the story about how he not only directed, but charmed Frank Sinatra while directing Magnum P.I., and that is an incredible story. Alan J. Levy. But the thing you need to know, because you won't get this from reading IMDb, is that when Richard Cola left the Battlestar Galactica pilot, the man who came and took over and really made that phenomenal 3-hour debut and ultimately became a film released in theaters in Sense-Around. Richard finished that and created the aesthetic that the 1978 Galactica is known for. It's no accident that this was capable of being released in theaters. I mean, it's a beautiful looking film. There's so much of it that stands along Star Wars as some of the great sci-fi of the 70s and stands the test of time. And then he came back and did Gun on Ice Planet Zero, a two-parter that's among the greatest Galacticas ever made. So, Alan Levy. And I'm so thrilled that another person who can give us incredible insight not only into the making of Battlestar Galactica, but also working with Richard Hatch, who we pay tribute here tonight, is a man who has written or produced over 5,000 television episodes for 100 different series. He's been nominated for 10 Emmy Awards and won 5 of them, as well as the prestigious George Foster Peabody Award. Along with Jim Carlson, he was story editor of the original Battlestar Galactica and wrote a number of episodes, including Fire in Space, Murder on the Rising Star, Take the Celestra, and also wrote the unproduced second season episode 2 for Twilly. He worked on the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, and as well as Magnum P.I., and Love Boat, MASH, Exo Squad, James Bond Jr., and currently he's extremely active and an industry leader in the unscripted space with game shows. He created Quicksilver and Camouflage, and was the head writer of Jeopardy for 7 years. Currently he's looking for work. We're glad to have found some for you tonight at least. Terry O'Donnell. Two more people who had nothing to do with the Bionic Woman, although you may have worked on the reboot. This next guy, you may wonder why he's on this panel, and I'll tell you. He'll tell you about it too. He's an Emmy Award winner for The Office. He's directed for The Office as well as the Mindy Project. He's an incredible guy, but he's an unlikely connection to Battlestar Galactica through The Office. He'll tell you about it. He also cut that wonderful montage we saw, or sort of heard at the beginning of the panel, and that's Dave Rogers. Dave? And I just want to say, Dave, don't geek out too much that some of these guys worked on Knight Rider. Dave actually has a kit, and I'm not talking about like the kind you buy in the dealer's room, like a little Corgi or Matchbox. He has an actual kit that drives and talks that he takes to the office. And I remember when he showed it to me at the Galleria shopping mall. I didn't know if it was the coolest thing ever or the most pathetic. I think I'm sort of leaning towards cool, but I'm not quite there yet. And last but not least, my co-writer on Launch All Vipers, the oral history of Battlestar Galactica, as well as a writer and editor for Empire Magazine and FHM Online. He is a legendary sci-fi and genre journalist, and also the co-author of the 50-Year Mission and the upcoming Buffy oral history, Vampires and Slayers, Edward Gross. Now that I've finished these introductions, I'd like to thank you for coming. It was a great evening, and we'll see you next year. I want to ask, Alan, since you ended up directing the Saga of a Star World pilot, can you tell us a little bit about how you first got involved with Battlestar Galactica and what your thoughts were when it was brought to you?
Well, that was just a fortunate happening. Richard Cola, as you know in the credits, has credit for directing that show. But about halfway through, there grew a slight chasm between he and Glenn Larson. And Larson said, "You do have other things to do, don't you?" And I think Richard said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Good, you're off." So they hired me to complete it. Richard shot 25 days, I shot 27.
But if I'm not mistaken, you turned him down. How did he eventually lure you into doing the pilot?
Oh, well, I hadn't been out here in Hollywood too long. And my folks, who were at the very first filming that I ever did in my life when I was 15 in St. Louis, they had never been out here, and my dad was surprised that I was making it to begin with out here. And I said to Glenn, I can't take it over because my folks are due to come out here next week, and I don't want anything to interrupt their visit. And he said to me, I'll tell you what, I'll give you my limousine, I'll give you a driver and a host for the entire week they're here to do anything that you want if you'll take over the show. Well, what a great welcome from my folks. So I did the show.
And they had a run-in with Hollywood royalty when they were on the set, I believe?
They definitely did. But more than I did. I was working. They played. They had a good time. It was kind of a fun story. It was. You probably remember this. We were in the loft where all of the ships were launched. There were about 85 of you guys ready to climb on your ships. And this was the first day that my folks had arrived. And we sent the limousine to the airport to get them. And I was up on a crane. We had a crew of probably 40 or 50 and another 40 or 50 cast members. And I was up on the crane, and everybody was getting into their ships, and the door opened to the stage. And in walked my mom and my dad and their host. And I called a recess. I said, "Okay, guys, everybody take 10. And everybody went, "Oh, okay, fine." And I got down and walked over and gave my mom and dad both a hug and a kiss. And Lauren Green walked over. And he said, "I got to meet the parents of the guy who just shut down an 85 crew for 15 minutes to come say hello."
I love that story.
So he and my dad became friends for the whole week, and it was really fun.
When they weren't using Glenn Larson's limo. So, Herb, tell us, You know, how you got involved with Galactica. I know that Richard Hatch used to talk about how he was courted after coming off streets of San Francisco, and at the time the script had a lot of the Ralph McQuarrie illustrations that sort of showed the actors what they were intending to do. I mean, it's a long time ago, but how much can you tell us about, getting involved with the show?
Well, to begin with, I was doing at the time Battlestar Galactica was being cast, I was doing a play, David Rabe, an award-winning David Rabe play called Streamers, which was a play about Vietnam. And it turns out that a lot of people don't know this, but I wasn't the original choice for Boomer. Terry Carter had been set to play Boomer on Battlestar Galactica. He had a great relationship with Glenn because of his involvement with McLeod playing Sergeant Broadhurst. And it turns out that Terry was out with his daughter and a bunch of people in Venice, California, skating. Took a bad turn, fell down, and broke his ankle, which immediately took the role of Boomer away from him. So they opened up general casting. I was in the middle of doing this award-winning play in Westwood, California, and my agent said, Herb, they want to have you in to read, audition, and interview for the role of a fighter pilot in a new science fiction television series, pilot for the series. However, they do not want to even have you come in to be interviewed or to be considered if you're not available. I had already signed a contract to do a Mary Tyler Moore movie for television called First You Cry. I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the project about breast cancer. So I had to make the decision. Before I could even go in and meet and audition, I had to relinquish the role of a doctor in First You Cry. And they said they would let me go if I found an actor who met their approval. I found a very, very fine actor by the name of James A. Watson Jr. I got to Universal and there was something like 30 or 40 different actors being considered for the role of Boomer. And out of that 50, this guy, I guess I must have fit the boots or something, but I got the nod. That's it in a nutshell. So in the beginning of shooting Galactica, I don't know whether you were directing to that, Al, but it was in my contract. I was still in the play. I had to be released by 6 o'clock so that I could leave the set, go back to Westwood, and perform in this award-winning play called Streamers. So it's an actor's dream to be working.
And an 80s nightmare.
1978. I loved it, but we got it done. So that's it in a nutshell. But maybe, did any of you know that Terry Carter was first considered for the role of Boomer? A lot of people don't. Anyway, that's it in a nutshell, Mark.
What was your reaction when you first looked at the material? Do you remember?
Oh,
were you a fan of the genre? Was it,
I've been a fan of science fiction and anything having to do with aerospace since I'm about 8 years old. This was a child's dream. I get to fire a laser weapon and I get to fly around in deep space. I get to dress up in these great outfits. I was looking forward to it. But in the back of my mind, considering all of the talented individuals that were also being considered, I thought my chances were kind of, to tell you the truth. It was a dream come true.
And it's interesting because you were one of the few actors who was brought back for Galactica 1980. Did you ever have an idea sort of why that was, and in terms of your involvement? Obviously you and Lauren were the holdovers.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I kept hoping, for those of you, I saw a whole bunch of fans out there kind of go, Galactica 1980 when that was brought up. Okay, guys, we do this for you. If it wasn't for you, we'd have none of this. But I don't know whether Dirk and Richard were even interested in being a part of this, or whether they've moved on to other projects. Maybe Alan can shed some light on this. I don't know whether he was asked to come aboard, but it seems that by the time we got to Galactica, most of the sets had been cut up.
Yeah.
And they had been used, if you look really closely at Buck Rogers in the 25th century, if you look really closely at some of those bulkheads and some of the sets, you'll see that they're Galactica sets that have been painted. Seriously. I kept hoping that the show would get better as we went along. But it didn't seem to get the same type of feedback from you guys as the original. Of course, every actor loves their work. I was happy to be pulling in a paycheck, but at the same time, I missed my team. I missed that quality of work both in front of and behind the camera. We had gotten to the point where we were a team of people, a cast and crew, that were at the point where we could no-look pass with each other. It was a true family. This is one of the great joys of seeing these two guys right here, because we're part of something super special that happened some 40 years ago.
And that brings me to you, Terry. You know, people don't remember, but Galactica was the most expensive show ever produced for television at the time. Started originally as a plan to air it as a series of miniseries and MOWs, and quickly became an hour TV series, and at which point they knew they needed more talented writers to sustain this pace and create television. And then, tell us a little bit about how you got involved and sort of what the challenges were for you when you joined the Galactica crew.
My partner, Jim Carlson, and I had gotten our break on the $6 Million Man. We did 4 of those. And then when Bionic Woman came along, we kind of went along with the tide. And in the meantime, an ex-girlfriend of mine was working for the head of ABC who followed the primetime series. And she recommended us. And so we got a call from Don Belisario this one day, and he said, could you come in? And we were very excited because they were looking for story editors. So we walked in and he says, look, what we want you to do is go home and write us, we want to see how you write this stuff. Write Patton in Space. That's what he gave us. You guys may recognize this as the living legend that came later. Well, so we went home. There's no story. We have Patton in Space. So he says, give me the first act tomorrow morning. So, look, Jim and I were used, generally a writer has 2 weeks to turn in a first draft. Well, we could knock it out in a week because there were 2 of us, and he'd take the teaser at the beginning of the show and the first 2 acts, and I'd take the last 2 acts and the tag. So, and then we'd get together and edit it. So we were used to working quickly, and we were good on story structure. So we went home and we hammered out the entire script, or the entire structure of the show, and we stayed up all night, and we wrote the first act. And we went into Belisario's office at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we turned it in, and he kind of flipped through it, and he says, give me Act 2 in the morning. So, okay, so we knock out Act 2, we deliver it Wednesday morning. And we didn't hear from him. He says, okay, thanks. And we don't hear from him, So we're anticipating we're gonna get a phone call. So at 5:30 that night, we hadn't heard from him, and I drove out to Jim's house. And I walked in the door, and Jim's got a glass of wine waiting for me. He says, welcome, story editor. And I looked at him and I said, are you kidding me? He says, yeah, you got the job. So we went in, and the good news was that we were the story editors, and we were going to get to do some scripts. The bad news was they threw out those 2 acts because Glenn wanted to write a 2-part episode, and he called it The Living Legend. We noticed that Glenn always used religious names, so instead of Cain in our script, it was Jedediah. You know, I just remember that for some bizarre reason. Something interesting about this is those 2 acts, we found this out maybe 5 years ago, were sent to Ann Lockhart, and she took the series because of those 2 ads. So, anyway, that's how we got involved.
Yeah, so I always find it interesting, because on Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry had approached Lloyd Bridges about doing Captain Pike before they cast Jeffrey Hunter. And Lloyd Bridges was, I don't want to do that sci-fi crap. And he just come off Sea Hunt, which was very successful. And of course, he does play, Commander Kane in Living Legend, and it's brilliant. And it's one of those things where you look back and you say, I wonder if he had said yes to Gene, what that would have been. But I mean, certainly one of the most memorable episodes, and which was very well sequelized. I mean, Michelle Forbes played Kane in the reimagination, and she was great in that role as well. So a wonderful role that you gave birth to all those many years ago. Dave Rogers, and I love when you do a panel, not only with the people that made a show, but the people that it influenced and had an impact on. And Dave is, as I said, an Emmy Award-winning editor and director for The Office. You came to work every day at Universal Studios where they made Galactica before they turned it into a theme park. Tell us, because a show that kept Galactica alive in the zeitgeist, that wore its love for Galactica on its sleeve, was The Office. And I'm just wondering how that came to be. You were instrumental in that, if I'm not mistaken.
And it's funny, I got into this industry because I wasn't influenced by what you guys did. I mean, the quality of Battlestar Galactica, when you watch the movie premiere and even the series, the quality, because I've worked on a bunch of shows, I know what it takes, and I still can't fathom the manpower and money that you guys put in to make every episode look like a movie. So I grew up on these shows, The $6 Million Man, The Bionic Woman, The Battlestar Galactica.
Knight Rider.
I studied Fire and Space, was in my screenwriting. Fire and Space.
The greatest episode ever written.
We studied, I went to Ithaca College, and we studied Fire and Space in
Not Cornell, by the way, Ithaca College.
in screenwriting. We studied Fire and Space. So here I am. I'm a big fan of Battlestar Galactica. I worked on various things. I came up as an assistant editor. I worked on Seinfeld and a bunch of other shows. Andy Richter Controls the Universe, News Radio. And my producer from News Radio said, hey, I got a pilot I want you to meet on. And I watched the pilot of The Office. And in it, Steve Carell does an impression of the $6 Million Man. And I said, I'm doing this show. So I met with Greg Daniels, who was the executive producer, and we talked about the show. And I said, I just love this environment, these characters. And I said, Dwight Schrute, Star Trek is too mainstream for him. He should like Battlestar Galactica. I said, I can picture him at his desk with like a Viper just sitting there in the background. And Greg, he kind of took this in. This is all the kind of stuff we talked about. I got hired on the show. I edited, I don't know how many episodes, but I started on the first episode after the pilot. Well, the next thing you know is the reimagination of Battlestar Galactica took off. And instantly, the writer started writing that for Dwight. Bears, Beats, Battlestar Galactica. And, it just kind of took off and it became that he was a fan of the show. For one of my birthdays, Greg Daniels bought me a original base ship model of a Cylon base ship. And then I directed the second to last episode. And in it, we have a plot point where Dwight, I don't know if you saw the clip at the beginning, but Dwight is painting the Galactica, and later he hangs it up, and he has possibly a son with his paramour, Angela, who says it's not his son. And there's a scene where the kid is looking and pointing, and we see the Galactica hanging up in his office, and he looks at it and he goes, that kid looks at the Galactica the same way I look at the Galactica. And I got to choose, props comes to like, what kind of Galactica you want? You want the new series or like they didn't have to finish the sets. I'm like, I want the classic Galactica. And sure enough, that's what we got. And I said, paint it, but we'll make it black, and then paint it so it looks like you're, really, that's the scene where Jim comes in and Dwight's, carefully painting it and later hangs it up. And, to me, it all came full circle for me to get to direct and edit, this episode, the second to last one, to have the Galactica in there. And just to wrap it up, I have the Galactica, and Rainn Wilson signed it to me. He says, Galactica loves you, Rainn Wilson, Dwight. That's hanging up in my apartment.
Ed Rose, Ed, you're obviously hard at work right now on the book. Why do you think here we are approaching the 40th anniversary of Galactica? And look, we're doing a panel it's still a show that is beloved. Universal came out with a great Blu-ray, and if you don't have the Blu-ray set, it's wonderful because it's laden with scenes that were cut from the original show, but also they reformatted it because, at the time, it was, for 133 for televisions at the time, and they reformatted it for 185 for widescreen TVs, and it looks phenomenal. I actually went back and watched Gun on Ice Planet Zero in 185, and it looked great. So tell us why here, almost 40 years later, we're still talking about Battlestar Galactica, why it resonates and why it lives.
It's good.
I mean, there are a lot of shows from the 1978 TV season we wouldn't think twice about today.
It's just, first of all, I remember when the show came out, it captured the imagination because, everyone said, it's like Star Wars except for television. But the concept of it was just phenomenal. That 3-hour debut was something we'd never seen before. That type of presentation for a TV show. And it just made an impact on a generation growing up who, like Star Trek, I think, hands it down to the next generation. When we're writing the book, we get speaking to people working on the new show. Like Ron Moore, for instance, spent hours on the phone, and I can't tell you how much he loved the original show. And that love is what translates and keeps it going into the future.
Well, Herb, I'd ask you, if Star Trek was Wagon Train to the Stars, then Galactica in a way was Bonanza. And not just because of Lorne Greene, but because it was about a family. They were like the Cartwrights. And I wondered if it was a family not just on screen, but off screen as well.
Thank you for that question, because that'll take me back to a reshoot we had. We were shooting on the back lot. I think it was you guys know all the episodes. Which one was the episode where we had the bull rage, the big people?
Magnificent Warriors.
Magnificent Warriors.
Magnificent Warriors. Thanks no more about I work on a script, I work on something, I memorize it, I do the job, I'm out of there, man, don't ask me what the dialogue, they know all the dialogue. Finish the story. There was a scene when Cyrus Bellaby has been kidnapped by the Boreans, if you remember that episode. Originally, you saw us, in the episode that you've seen, I'll get to the Bonanza part of your question here, but that triggered an anecdote. You saw us on the top of a land ramp riding into that village. Okay? Originally, they had us all on horses. They had Lorne Greene on a horse. They had Apollo, Starbuck, and Boomer on horses riding behind Lorne Greene. We shot it on the back lot. And they came back from Glen, guys, we can't use that. Why can't we use it? Because it looks like Ben Cartwright in the sun. That is a true story. I'd love to get that film. I'm sure it's somewhere on the probably somebody has it in a collection. But that's a true story.
That's a great story.
That's like Bonanza.
That's great.
Somebody even looked at it in dailies and said, no, seriously. But our relationship, and most of our relationships with Lorne Greene was, if you knew him, if you worked with him, he was very, very much like the man that you grew to love in Bonanza. we all kind of gravitated to him. We were all, it was a chaotic work situation with 14-hour days, sometimes 5, 6, 7 days a week. And we were all in orbit around Lorne. He kind of kept us all chill. And he was Papa. You should say that into the mic there. He was Papa.
You did.
But he was a great chess player. We had an ongoing chess game on the set of Battlestar Galactica. We had a board, we'd set it up on an apple box. I'd make one move, and maybe sometime during the day he'd come by and he'd make his move. And the crew knew you were never to touch that board. We would leave the board sitting there all night, and we'd come back and all the pieces were there. But yeah, I'm sure that if you speak to any of us here who worked on the original, you'll find that we all kind of had a great admiration for Lorne Greene. He was sort of like an adopted uncle to me.
Yeah, I've never heard an ill word said of Lorne. You know, Alan, Herb mentions the land ram. Now, normally when you come on to something, you know, the first day you try and do a lighter day, less challenging. You came on in the middle, and if I recall, you had all the Ovions and Carillon and land rams and fighting. It was sort of a baptism by fire. Do you remember what that was? What was like while we're on the land ram?
There was a real fire. That was the thing. It was the scene where everybody was at the bottom of the gambling hall when the Cylons came in, and it was at night, and everybody had to run out. They were firing. There were things blowing up. We had the what would you call it? The tanks. They were outside, and you guys pulled up in them, and everybody had to run out. Boxy was trying to figure out which way to go. As, you know, the monkey. He was going in every direction. And finally, Jane Seymour just lifted him up and threw him in one of the doors. But we had a full night, and that was it. I mean, I was brought in under fire, and I needed an extinguisher by the end of the night, and that was it.
I would ask you, you know, it really is that era of late 70s television. It was so many of these legendary figures. It was sort of like the last time, you know, you look at Ava Gardner and Earthquake and all these things, but you guys had Ray Milland and you had Lou Ayres, and it was the end of an era of not just television, but these legendary figures in film and in television. But, you know, Terry, I think there's probably no more memorable guest star than Fred Astaire. Can you tell us a little bit about working with him in Man with Nine Lives?
Fred got the job because his grandson was a huge fan of the show. And this one day, there's a phone call from Fred Astaire, and Belisario comes up to us and he says, Fred Astaire wants to do the show. What? Do that? Well, anyway, he did it. He did a great job. I remember, Lorette Spang and I both saw this from apparently different sides of the soundstage to show what a consummate professional Astaire was. We were both on the soundstage, I guess, this one day, and nobody was around. And Astaire was over by himself, and he was practicing different ways to sit down in a chair. He was just doing it this way, and he was doing it this way, he was doing it, and finally he got it. It was very comfortable for him. Always had the lines down, always professional. This was a particularly interesting episode because it was the last time he ever danced on film. Not many people know that. I think I'm the one that brought it up. Who was the woman?
Cassiopeia.
No. It was the woman who started top of the TV series.
Ann Jeffries.
Ann Jeffries. Ann Jeffries, and he didn't want to dance. He didn't want to do this. And Don Belisario sweet-talked him. And says, just give me a few moves, you know, just this little thing. And so Fred did it, and we had that last little moment there. which I thought was pretty cool.
I would be remiss, given in the last 2 years we lost two people that were so important to Galactica, Glenn Larson and Richard Hatch, not to ask these gentlemen any anecdotes or memories or thoughts about both of them. And then, of course, I do want to open it to some questions, but I'm sure you have some questions as well. But anything you want to share with us, either professionally or personally, from your time with Glenn and Richard? I'll start with Alan.
Glenn had a good friend by the name of Leslie Stevens. And Leslie was an alien expert. And he wrote books on aliens, he wrote books on interplanetary travel and the whole bit. And Universal had turned down Star Wars. And Glenn had read the script somehow. And he said, I'm going to beat Star Wars to the screen. And that's how Battlestar Galactica got off the ground. And it was he and Leslie Stevens who actually put the original together. I think that was fairly interesting. Not a lot of people know that. But we did. We beat him by about 8 months, I believe. Something like that, almost a year.
Yeah, I mean, Leslie Stevens, and we talked about this, is sort of what Gene Coon was to Star Trek in terms of Roddenberry's contribution and then Gene Coon. But Leslie Stevens was to Glenn Larson. Leslie unfortunately died, and so doesn't get the attention and the credit he deserves, but was so involved with the birth of Galactica and many other shows. Of course, was one of the co-creators with Stefano of The Outer Limits, and ultimately helped give birth to Buck Rogers in the 25th century, which is sort of the anti-Galactica. And I love Buck Rogers, but it's the fun, pulpy, kind of, rollicking. I mean, how can you not watch like Flight of the War Witch and just enjoy it for the crazy, wacky doodle thing, fakakta thing that it is. But Leslie Stevens, co-created that with Glenn Larson as well.
And the Invisible Woman.
And the Invisible Woman. The Invisible Man, right, which is where you first met him. Herb, tell us, obviously, maybe a little bit what you remember about Glenn Larson, a very larger-than-life character, and of course, Richard Hatch.
Well, guys, I miss them both. Okay, I'm going to put this in a reverse order because we've lost Richard here on a little over a month and a few weeks. And a lot of you may not realize this, but Richard and I worked together, knew each other long before Battlestar Galactica. Did any of you know that? The first time I worked with Richard was on Streets of San Francisco. I did an episode where he, after he had taken over from Michael Douglas, and also in that episode was an actor of Battlestar Galactica, an actor named Richard Lynch, that you may recall. You know it, we were both escaped cons from San Quentin. And of course, Richard has come into it. Well, anyway, Time Out's the name of the episode. Richard and I, for the last 40 plus years, have had an association. We weren't really close friends, but we had something in common that kind of took us to the far corners of the earth, and that was Battlestar Galactica. We traveled to Asia, to Europe, Australia, and I don't know, it's just too soon for me to kind of really put the impact of Richard's loss into words, especially here at this convention. This is one of the first time, this is the first time in 10, 12 years that I've done the Wondercon convention through Comic-Con International, that we haven't been appearing together for you guys. So this is rough. I've been through this before, but somehow or other it never gets easy. But I can tell you one thing about Richard, that the love he had in his heart for you guys, the fans, was genuine. Anytime, anywhere on the street, If you walk up to Richard, no matter what he's in the middle of, he always had time for you. I can tell you that all of that was genuine. The man was full of a lot of love and grace. And I'm still processing his loss. Now, regarding Glenn, same is true. It wasn't a contemporary of Glenn's, but I can tell you this, that I worked for Glenn before and after Battlestar Galactica. Glenn, kept my rent paid and a roof over my head and food in my belly in a lot of different ways. I worked for him on
Fall Guy.
huh?
Fall Guy?
Fall Guy. For Fall Guy, I did Knight Rider. God, you guys, what are we going to do without you guys? This is why we all love you, why we don't have an industry without you. You're the ones, you're the lubricant that make all of this work. I mean that sincerely. But yeah, there's so many. Once in a while I got to pull one show out of 50 years in the industry and I get one mixed up with the other and bang, you guys just go right out. Okay. What was the show with Alec, medical examiner?
Oh, Quincy, yeah, that's right, Quincy.
Okay, and the Fall Guy from him. Several other shows from him. And I was always honored and pleased that he would think of me to say, Herb, we've got something over here I think you'd be right for. Why don't you come on? So, and another bit of irony here is which gives a little, focuses a little bit on the circle of life. I became a grandfather on November 20th of 2015. Thank you guys. Some of you may recall my daughter Rebecca, who when she was born received a T-shirt and the nickname of Boomer Baby. Boomer's Baby, okay? Now, my granddaughter was born at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. I'll tighten it up for you in a second. My granddaughter was born at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, where my daughter was born. And on the day we brought her home, on the 22nd, I went to the hospital and I was in a suit and I was dressed in a particular way. I said, so where are you going to go? I have to go to meet some people. So I left Cedars-Sinai Hospital and I drove immediately to the Mormon church for Glenn Larson's funeral. So I sent my brand new granddaughter home from the hospital and I went over to say goodbye to one of the finest, most prolific producers of television in the history of the medium. And met with his son, met with all of his family just to say goodbye. And I'm still processing both because somehow or other we wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for a vision. And all of us who are in the creative arts know that it all starts with a vision. The vision of one Glenn A. Larson is why we sit on this panel. And what a legacy he has left us. And I'm sure he's smiling, looking down on us and saying, thanks, guys. And I say, thank you, Glenn. Thanks for the ride.
There's an old expression, we shall not see the likes of him again, and Glenn was one of those old TV moguls like Aaron Spelling and some of these legendary figures, Quinn Martin, and there'll never be anybody like Glenn Larson again, that's for sure. Terry, any thoughts you want to share with us about your association with Glenn and Richard? Or should we give you John Colicos just to mix things up?
With Glenn, Glenn and I had a different kind of relationship than Herb's. Early on, Jim and I were reading a lot of scripts that they had gotten in the early days of the business of the show that they weren't going to shoot, and so we were looking through them to see if maybe there was something an idea that we could take and run with, or maybe just polish it up, open the script up a little bit, and we were also confused by the language on the show, because sectons were centons, and it was like, you know, your head was going to explode. So what I did was I went through all the scripts that they had shot, and I wrote down all of these words, and I put down what the definition was, so that we had a couple of sheets of paper that everybody could look at when we wanted to do a day or a year or whatever it was going to be. So I'm very proud of this. And so at the end of one of the days, I went up to Glenn's office, and he had just finished a script. I forget which one. And he said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I have some notes on your script. Don't ever say that. Don't ever say that. So I could see him behind his desk, and it looked like Mount Vesuvius was just out of his shirt. And he said, what kind of notes? And I said, well, basically, it was just, you know, just so we could all use the same language for certain things. And he goes, okay. And it was like he was furious with me. So we kept our distance for quite a while. But you know, we still did our work, and he was very nice to us. Don't get me wrong, but it was just one thing that I absolutely remember, that because this was my first job as a story editor, and I didn't want to screw it up. You know, so I learned a big lesson, I think. Now Richard, on the other hand, he and I had a fun relationship. First of all, he was the first actor that ever came to Jim and myself who wanted to sit down with us, the writers, and talk about his character. You know, how we could improve the character, what little pieces of business we could give him, little things like that. And he was very, very concerned, as any good actor is, to get the most out of who they are portraying. And so, and he would come up to the office from time to time, and we would have little chats. And I remember he had complained because Dirk was getting all of the comedy lines. Well, that's the character of Starbuck, and he wanted to have some funny lines. That's not the character of Apollo, but okay. You know, we took it in stride, and we talked to Belisario about it. You know, and he goes, okay, all right. So the next thing we know, one of the scripts that was in the pipeline, I don't remember if Don wrote it or if Glenn wrote it. If you noticed, I can't remember which script it was.
Experiment in Terra, I think.
Experiment in Terra?
And
Whichever one it was, where Richard was funny in that episode because all he did was he just flipped Apollo and Starbuck's dialogue in that entire script.
with Edward Mulhern.
Absolutely. And Richard was always kind to me when it came to these panels and the Galactica reunions and things. He always included me. And I always made him laugh. And I remember we were on the Galactica cruise. Was anybody at that cruise? I was. Remember you? And he was teaching. He asked if I wanted to sit into his acting class, and I said, yeah. And he was talking. He was making some point. I forget what it was, but it was something about an experiment done on mice, where they were injected with like large amounts of silicone. And I looked at whoever was sitting next to me, and I said, well, at least they got dates for Saturday night. He didn't hear that. All he heard was me make some snide comment and interrupt his train of thought. So he goes, okay, Mr. Big Shot Hollywood writer, is there anything that I could possibly answer for you? And I said, what's the capital of Honduras? So he never really knew what to make of me, but we had a very nice
Alan, I have to ask you before we open it to questions, you know, you dig Rogue One 37 years before there was a Rogue One, 40 years before there was a Rogue One. A bunch of cutthroats and mercenaries have to stop a terrible superweapon from destroying an intrepid group of rebels. And of course that was Gun on Ice Planet Zero, which was, I can't imagine the challenges of shooting an ice planet in sub-zero temperatures on the universal backlot in the middle of summer. So can you tell us a little bit about that world that you created where I think the Jurassic Park ride is right now?
There is one story about that. It was kind of funny. We were on stage, stage 27, I think, and we shot the first day. And being as hot as it was outside, we had a gigantic air conditioner inside, which brought the temperature all the way down to 68 degrees. And if you guys remember, and I'm sure you remember as well as I do, everybody was dressed in parkas, and they had face masks and everything else. But we could take about 4 seconds worth of film, you know, and cut. People were just perspiring, it was just dripping off of them. So I called the tower, and I talked to Earl Bellamy Jr., who was head of production, and I said, Earl, we've got to have at least another refrigeration unit down here. Either that, or it's going to take 6 months to do this 2-hour show. And he said, oh, it can't be that bad. And I said, well, after lunch, will you come down? And he came down after lunch, and he stood there, and we did the rehearsal, and then we suited everybody up, and I rolled the camera, and in about 5 seconds I said, cut, and everybody goes on, and they're wiping the perspiration down. The next morning, we had 3 refrigerators on set.
Well, before we wrap things up, are there any questions for our August panel of Galactic experts? Any questions from our audience? Yes, sir. Oh, wearing the Star Wars shirt, ironically. Yes.
2 questions. One, how do I get your excellent Star Trek book? I hear there's a rumor there might be copies.
I didn't pay this guy. I don't know this guy. He's shilling. Well, since you mentioned it, I have one last copy. 50-year edition from St. Martin's Press, written by this lovely man over here, Ed Gross, and myself. Booklist hails it as Kirkus Reviews, an absolute must for any Star Trek fan. Booklist, breathtaking in scope and depth. This is a must-read for Star Trek lovers. Don't forget to buy their Galactica book next year. It doesn't say that. There you go. I'll be delighted to. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Galactica. I'll be the judge if it's a good question. Right. Oh, that's a great question for Alan and for Herb. That, at the time, was the most expensive set ever built for television. It was a $1 million set. And I think Herb talks about how on Galactica 1980, you always see them in this little cubicle off to the side because they couldn't rebuild the Galactica set again. So you see stock footage from Galactica, and then usually it's him and Warren like in a corner, which they rebuilt. But you worked on the Galactica set, Alan, a lot, and in fact it doubled for the Atlantia, which they blew up Blue Airs. I mean, it was insane, and they had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of computers from Tektronix, which was a big deal at the time because computers weren't exactly household items. So what can you tell us about these Galactica Bridge set?
Well, the wonderful thing about it was that we not only had a bunch of great guys in front of the camera, but we had some super guys behind the camera. Benny Coleman was the DP of the original 3-hour. But we had and this was a gift to me because I was a cameraman once, and I had, without a doubt, the best camera operator I could ever wish for in my life. And I could set up any shot, and we shot at least half of almost every scene with the crane, a big crane that could go all the way from the bottom of the Galactica set all the way up to the very, very top of it, all in one shot. And this guy, we could set up shots that would follow them all around the set, and he never missed a beat. He was just, it was amazing. I remember one time we had this unbelievable scene. Marion Jensen was down on the bottom, and there was an attack coming. and she ran up the rear ramp, came across the middle portion of the set, up to the top of the set, and I think she attacked Obama right up there and said, "We've got a problem, we've got a problem." And I said, "Cut." And I looked at the operator and I said, "Did you get it?" And he said, "Wasn't I supposed to?"
Herb, you remember anything about working on that set, on that Galactica Bridge set?
Oh, for sure. As I was saying to Alan here, just a second ago, I was whispering to him about the snow, the snow, the faux snow that we used. Guys, they had these big bins that have been made with wooden cylinders that had chicken wire wrapped all around it. And inside, they had this clipped up plastic, white plastic. And what they do, they put it on a gear and they turn it around so that it snows. Okay? But this stuff is plastic, man. We're trying to act like I'm breathing in all of this plastic stuff. But of course, the director and the crew were wearing what? Come on.
We were wearing masks.
They all have to wear the masks. And we're emoting and all of this stuff.
We're not actors.
We're indispensable. No, but another thing about being on the set, there wasn't a better, when I mentioned to you earlier about having a cast and crew that was beginning to work like a well-oiled machine on all cylinders, and you're working with people that you can know the past with. You know when you get there to do something, you don't even have to look behind you because you know that your teammate is there to back you up. That's in front of them behind the camera. But yeah, just a wonderful, seamless working condition. This is especially true when you're working on a project where we're all brand new to Galactica. None of us. All Galactica was to us, Mark, was a book and the vision of Glenn Larson. So we had to kind of work and see what worked and didn't work all on our own. You know, I don't know whether you found that to be true. You jumped on a merry-go-round, but that's what I love most about our set. We've been on a number of sets in our careers here, but there was something about the Battlestar Galactica set that I wish there were more behind-the-scenes footage of what we did.
It was something brand new.
Yeah.
Never been done for television.
This is especially true with John Dykstra. You guys know John Dykstra? You're watching and working with a mechanical engineer and a genius, the visual effects of John Dykstra, making us all look like $1 million. Yeah.
And that's another reason why John Dykstra never worked on any more Star Wars movies. George Lucas was so mad that Dykstra had gone and done Galactica after Star Wars that they had a falling out. And of course, you know, John Dykstra has gone into a very successful career, working on many, many wonderful movies, winning Oscars.
Several
Oscars. And you really can see the difference between, you know, Dykstra, who did the first 3 miniseries, the pilot and Gun on Ice Planet Zero and Lost Planet of the Gods, and then when Heartland, which was the in-house Universal company, comes on and does the effects, which weren't nearly on par with what Dykstra was doing, which was truly groundbreaking for television, extraordinary work.
And by the way, before you ask, a fine human being, I have to say, is John Dykstra. A joy to work with. Just want to toss that.
And still, you know, very active in the business to this very day.
Just thinking about Battlestar Galactica just brings back so many memories for me. I was 7, 8 years old when the show came out, and I moved to a new city, and I remember when the pilot film started. I was looking forward to it for weeks ever since I saw the big articles in Starlog, and then I think that night an ABC News special report about
That's so
Camp
funny
David
that you said
Accords.
that. The Camp David Accords, Jimmy Carter interrupted Galactica. I told Alan this, and he never knew that. And I gotta tell you, I mean, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I hate Jimmy Carter because he interrupted Battlestar Galactica. 2 hours, I can tell you the scene. It was with the land ram on Carillon, just when they found out there were Cylons on Carillon. And all of a sudden, a special news report from ABC. Jimmy Carter has signed with Menachem Begin the Camp David with Sadat, the Camp David Accord. Where's Galactica? I gotta go to school tomorrow.
I negotiated with my parents to stay up late.
Great! I feel your pain.
Please, you gotta let us stay up.
Yeah, the same thing. They're like, you gotta go to sleep. It's almost 11 o'clock. No, I don't. I'm staying as long until Galactica is over. Because we didn't have a VHS or anything then. So if you didn't see it, there was a chance you would never see it.
And that was only on the eastern, was that all, was that?
Unless you're on the West Coast.
Only on the eastern seaboard, was that the eastern seaboard?
That was on the East Coast, yeah.
To follow up with that is moving to a new town. I remember my brother and I, we were trying to act out all these things for Star Wars or whatever, but Battlestar Galactica was really something we would play. We'd take turns playing Apollo and Star Wars. I had a friend who was African American and said, "You can be Boomer." And that kid built the heavy set and said, "You can be Jolly." And the girl was Apollo.
Stereotyping.
Like, no, you can't play. Then the Living Legend show comes and there's Lieutenant Sheba, and we're like, okay, you can play this. Honestly, I have kids who are.
You should have found somebody to play Athena. You don't have to be able to act to do that.
I have kids now who are.
It's late.
And I feel bad for them because they don't have a show like this that I asked them, what's your favorite show? And they really can't tell me. There's nothing that I think will endure as long as Galactica has endured. And you guys really didn't have a whole lot of time, one season, to make an impression. What do you think it is about Battlestar Galactica that makes it endure the way it does?
Herb?
Yeah, I'll tackle that, but I've got a director and a writer here that can probably put it into better terms than I can. But I'm serious. But I have to tell you, I'm going to go back. It starts with an idea, guys. It starts with a vision. There is something about the way that Galactica was written and produced, the saga, for you as young fans, for those of you who were of the 8, 9, 10-year-old fans, and even the fans today who are in that age group, you can tune into the original Battlestar Galactica and you immediately know who the good guys are, you know who the bad guys are, you know what the objective is. Alrighty? And somehow or other, this all started with the vision. And I say again, a vision that one Glenn A. Larson had for the story. There are less, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you can probably tell me down to the second. I didn't realize you were that big of a
Centon. I can tell you down to the centon. Terry, is that correct?
No, to the micron, or millicentile.
We need your list, Terry.
Something you've got to understand. And every time I look back on it 40 years ago on this project that I worked on, some 40 years ago, that people still tune in. They don't want to know anything about my other body of work. I worked on, God, award-winning, give me award-winning work. I don't want to do it. They want to talk about the life. Do award-winning work in the theater. I don't want to, that's nice. Let's talk about the life. Guys, I love it. But there are less than 30 hours total. Less than 30 hours total, including the 3-hour pilot of the original Battlestar Galactica. Are you aware of that? Something must have clicked with you, the fans.
Alan, did you want to?
Yeah, just very shortly, it's not only that it was a new genre of filmmaking, but it was a story about a family. You guys were all family. And I think when you do a show about family, Dave, you probably know this better than anybody. People at home want to watch a family attack the bad guys or any problems or any challenges that come up. And all you guys on the show, it was a family. And it was one of the first family shows, especially in space, obviously.
Absolutely. Terry?
I think it's more than that. This was about a group of people who are looking for their home. It's like the Wizard of Oz, only sideways. They've lost everything. And I'm sure that lots of people can relate to this. And, you know, some people don't have a home anymore. So I think that just subconsciously, it's there in the background. Nobody talks about it, other than at the beginning when they say they're looking for, a planet called Earth. But I think that it tugs at your heart for that reason. Sorry?
Oh, you're trying to get attention for Corey. You want to ask a question too? Well, Corey's been coming to these panels for years, so we'll let him go first. That was very nice of you, because you're a ringer. So we'll let him go. Corey, go ahead.
I'll be real quick. It's amazing how all things connect. Galactica came out in '78, and one of my favorite horror movies, Halloween. What I learned was that things are different. In your part was that Michael Myers started. That's what John Carpenter's first shoot was really showed before it was from David Curtis. That's fine how
Can I interrupt you a second? Jim and I wrote a script called Two for Twilly. Two for Twilly. It did not get produced. It was basically about the chief mechanic on the fleet. And he's married to this woman. And all of a sudden the Galactica, or at least one of the aggro ship, I believe, starts listing, and it's heading toward a megastar. And they can't do anything about it, and they're going to lose the food. So they get Twilly over there to start fixing it, and you discover that, yeah, he's married to this woman, but he's married to this woman too, who's on another ship. And so he's got to juggle both of them, and he's so confused that he can't get everything right. And at the end, when he's finally confronted with it, and they're back at the ship, and they get divorced, I forget what we called it. He's very upset, and then he calls his other wife. So that was the ending. But what I wanted to say was they actually had a casting session for that, and one of the people that they were looking at was Jamie Lee Curtis. She came in and read for it, and she got the giggles in the middle of the audition. And my partner looked at me when we got back to our office. He says, "Poor kid, she's never going to go anywhere."
And then she got cast as Buck Rogers in the episode Unchained Woman. The greatest titles in the history of television, Buck Rogers. Unchained Woman, Planet of the Slave Girls, Flight of the War Witch. It was great. Sandra, go ahead. Because your husband directed it.
My wife was always right.
Very good. Mark, can I say something real quick?
Don never directed one, but he did write what was one of the best one-hour episodes, I thought, which is the final episode, Hand of God, yeah. And he wrote that. He wrote a couple other episodes, but that's sort of one that people...
One of the great lines, I know we're getting short, forgive me for interrupting you, but Don didn't, I can't call the episode, I'm sure if I describe it, you guys will come up with the episode. He did direct, but he wrote one of the finer lines and he brought it to me. And he said, "Herb, what do you think of this?" He says, "Well, you've written one. I just hope I'm able to deliver it the way you've written it because I can feel it in my soul." This was the episode of the planet, Lost Planet of the Gods. Okay? Did I get that episode? Boomer and Jolly bring back a virus or some disease to the Galactica, and they end up in suspended animation. They turn Boomer into a fudgesicle until they can find it. I get to say that. All right. Anyway, the girls end up on the planet, and the Cylons have attacked, and they begin they stagger up to the railing and say, Blue Squadron reporting for duty, sir. And Colonel Ty looks up and says, Lieutenant, you can't even stand. And Don wrote the great line for me where Boomer leans back and he says that the Viper is flown from the seated position. Well, we did the line better now than I did when I shot it back then. Most of us actors would like to go back and do our work again. There's always something that I want. Directors do. Anyway.
I'm glad you did, because I love that line.
Yeah. That was not no, sir.
I'd like you to ask a question, then Dave has one last thing to say, and then we're gonna have time for one last question because we gotta wrap up, so.
Okay, well, the Viper is actually a really good segue to this question. Now, I know you had a couple of Vipers for the wide angle scenes in the hangar. How many actually sat people in them at the same time? And my real question was, who was the goofiest person sitting in the Viper going, pew, 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 pew?
We all became kids when we got into that doggone thing. We became 9 years old. Well, we were sitting up, and I held up the lights up. It's hard to say. Who was the question directed to? Is that any of us?
I think anyone who wants to interject.
Actually, to Alan and to you, but as a director trying to get the wide shots and then get the close-up shots, you could only do one person in the Viper at a time, right?
We had 4 Vipers that could seat the pilots in the Vipers, but there was only one of the Vipers that literally had a full interior.
That's what, yeah, the insurance.
Yeah, with the panels and everything else. I think at one time, and maybe, I think they finished the second Viper so that we could float them side by side because they were always looking at each other.
Did you ever have any major incidents with moving Vipers?
No.
Take off shots?
No, again, we had a crew in back of us that was just spectacular. I really don't remember any incidents, any accidents like that at all, thank goodness. Yeah.
Dave Rogers, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I want to say, I've been fortunate to have worked on some successful television shows. And I want to say, like a show like Seinfeld, where they did the pilot, it got picked up for 4 episodes after that. And then the network said, all right, they said, let's do 13. And then, next thing you know, it runs for 7 years, it's a hit. The Office, same thing. We did 6 episodes, season 1. We got picked up for another 6, it went to 13, something caught on, and then the show runs for 9 seasons. Everything about this show, the writing, the directing, the chemistry between the actors, I mean, their skill, their talent, the realism and how much they believe and put into it is so amazing that she was saying, like, Don Bellisario was short-sighted. The only people who were short-sighted were the network executives, because this show should have run 5, 6, 7 seasons. I mean, there's no, and everything. It's like you figure out today, like a show like that, that's what would happen. And with merchandising, with toys and everything, you figure out how to subsidize that with Netflix, and then you get subscriptions.
Dave,
this show is so great.
It's worth pointing out that right now, there are less people watching CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox combined than watch Galactica on Sunday night, cumulatively. The ratings for Galactica finished the season as the 17th highest rated show of the season. It was just so expensive. And, ABC didn't want to stick with it. And it's so unfortunate because you're right, it could have gone on and should have. And it's really unfortunate.
Right? Wouldn't you guys have loved to be talking about season 5 of Battlestar Galactica?
Okay, well listen, I want to thank this amazing panel. It was truly an honor to be able to MC tonight. What a great group. I feel like I'm seeing my entire childhood on stage. And I'm just so grateful for them all making the trek down to this lonely city, Anaheim, and being here today, because it's not easy, as you know, to get here. And they all came down here, and we're so grateful. And thank you to Alan, and to Herb, and to Terry, and Dave, and Ed. Really appreciate it, and thank you for coming tonight. This was great.